This morning, we are starting to wrap up our series that we started on Easter Sunday called It's Not Over. And we've just been talking about the past several weeks, this idea that if you're not dead, God's not done. He still has a plan for you. And so this morning, we're going to look at Revelation 21. I'm going to explain what all of this is here for. I know some of you, like me, are more, you can learn by listening, but you also learn by seeing. So we're going to try to help us with that today. Revelation 21 is the story of what's going to happen when Christ returns. And it's really an exciting story. It's a very vivid picture that John paints for us in Revelation 21. But to really understand what's being said, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. And as we do that, what we'll see is that what John is describing in Revelation 21 is really the restoration of Eden, right? It's the second Eden experience that God created for us to experience. So this might be a little remedial for some of you, and if so, I apologize, but I'll do my best to run through it quickly. But for us to understand what's being said in Revelation, we're going to go all the way back to the story of the creation in Genesis, all right? So in Genesis chapter 1, we find the story of God creating the heavens and the earth. Okay, so let's see. Now, I know there are all kinds of young earth, old earth. There is no, just shut up, okay? There's none of that this morning. So this is just a line. It is not to scale. I'm not saying that there were all these things that happened before the earth. I'm not saying there weren't. I'm just saying God created, okay? So whatever you think, just calm down about it and let's all agree God created. Okay, so God creates the heavens and the earth in Genesis 1, and we have this amazing story that he tells us, and he creates the heavens and the earth and everything on the earth, the land and the sea and everything that's in them. He creates man and gives him work to do, and he's finding fulfillment and peace, but God recognizes, well, he's alone, and that's not good, so he creates woman, and he declares that all of this is good. And in Genesis 3, it tells us that God walks with the man, and he walks with the woman, and he talks with them, and he dwells with them in the garden. They live in this perfect experience, right? This is the land that we all long for. Like we're all born with this desire to return to Eden. We want to get back to that place where we are in perfect harmony with God, with each other, and with all of creation. Like this is the land we long to live in, but as you continue to read the Genesis story, we see in Genesis 3 the fall of man. Right? God has created them, he's placed them here in the garden, and he's given them only one rule. It says there's a tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat from that tree. The enemy comes, you've read the story, you're familiar with it. He comes to the woman and he tells her, did God really say that? Did he really mean that you can't do that? You know he only said that because if you eat the fruit of that tree, then you will become like God. And there's something in that man and woman that is also in you and me, and it's this desire of as soon as we're told, don't do that, we think, I'm going to do that. Right? And you see, if you're a parent of small children, like Mark and Miriam are going to have this, for those of you who have raised kids, you look at them in the season, you're like, that's so cute, just wait. Like, eventually that kid can talk and move and walk and disobey. And so yesterday our neighborhood pool opened, and we were over at the pool, and they've got a little hose there that the kids are supposed to wash their feet off when they come back from the pool, and so every summer, this is a source of contention between kids and parents because the hose is to wash your feet and the kids think the hose is to spray everything and everyone, right? So there's a little 4-year-old boy who lives in our neighborhood who's one of the cutest kids I've ever seen. And he was walking towards the hose and he said, Mom, can I use this? She said, no. He said, Mom, can I please use it? No, don't use it. And he said, okay, Mom. And he walked over and picked up the hose and turned on the water. And it was just this perfect picture of what Genesis 3 describes. Hey, don't do that. Don't do that. Okay. And then we go and we do it, right? And you don't outgrow it. Like there are still parts of you that if I, like there are people here this morning that if I said, hey, get out your bulletin and take notes, some of you would just, I'm not going to do that. You can't tell me. Like, it's in us, right? Stop telling me what to do. I can't take it. I don't like it. And we push back against it. And that's what's happening with Adam and Eve here in the creation story. It's what continues to happen to us. We have this longing to live in perfection with God, and yet we have this thing rising up in us that's constantly telling us, I think I could do a little better job than God can. Right? And every time we sin, every time we choose to enter into a way of life that is at odds with what God has revealed, we are acting on that same impulse that they acted on. And every sin at its core takes root and flows out of this desire to sit on a throne that does not belong to us. And so we see this happening. Eden is ruined by the sin of men and women. As you read through the rest of Genesis, we see the consequences of sin are let loose in the heart of the man and the woman, in their offspring, in all of creation. We begin to read stories of betrayal, of lies, of violence, of murder, of adultery, of deceit. We see it played out not just in their family, but across the world and throughout nations. We see the effects of sin and how far-reaching and unending they are. And yet, even as that's happening, Genesis begins to tell us the story of God's plan to take us back to Eden. Right? As sin brings lawlessness in Genesis and then again in Leviticus and Exodus, God begins to restore order. And in the Old Testament, he primarily does that by revealing himself to the nation of Israel and telling them, this is the way you're to worship me. These are the rules and the regulations. These are the patterns and rhythms of life that you're to institute. And part of what he's doing there is trying to restore order into the chaos that sin has brought to all of creation. And so throughout the Old Testament, you continue to read these stories of men and women long for Eden, and yet they are tempted by sin, they give in to sin, and they fall away from the life God has created for them. And so God sends prophets and priests and kings and judges to call his people back to himself. And the entire Old Testament is just this endless story of God revealing himself, people receiving him, and then them choosing to reject him, falling away in sin, and God again reaching out and restoring and renewing and saving. And it happens again and again and again. By the time we get to the New Testament and to the arrival of Jesus, we find God acting in a way to bring about the return to Eden. You see, when we long for Eden, more than we long for a land where we're at peace with all of creation, what we're really longing for is a land where we're at peace with God. And the Old Testament law was given to us to show us how we could live in right relationship with him. But the Old Testament law also highlighted our complete inability to do that by our own power. Because for every law that was given, it became an opportunity for us to break it. And so after all of these years and all the struggle and all this strife, God sends Jesus, and Jesus comes to establish his kingdom. He comes to provide a way where the hearts of men and women can once again begin to have some of this Eden experience, this idea that we walk with God and he walks with us. And Jesus comes to perfectly fulfill all of the law, all of the requirements, to satisfy all of the sacrifices. He comes to do for us what we could never do for ourselves. And it's this beautiful picture of life can be restored. The effects of sin can be broken. Right? The life, death, resurrection of Jesus are God's stamp that sin does not have the final say, that death will not win, that God has a plan, he's working that plan, and he's doing it through the person of Jesus Christ. Now, even while Jesus is on earth and he is describing what he came to do, he is always pointing ahead to the idea that one day he will return. And he will return to restore and renew all things. He will return to not just partially bring his kingdom, but to completely inaugurate it and to return us to this experience of life with God that we knew in Eden. And so he begins to promise this idea of a return. And as you read through the rest of the New Testament, you see the other writers who begin to expound on this idea of what it means to wait for the return of Christ and how we're to live. And they describe this land in between where we're living, where Christ has come once, and yet we are still waiting for him to return, to restore, and to renew all things. And it's on this hope of the second Eden, the return of Christ, that the Apostle John writes about in Revelation. Now, John knew what it was to live in this land in between. Right? He was there when Jesus came. He witnessed the miracles. He heard the teachings. He watched the crucifixion. He was a firsthand witness of the resurrection. He interacted with the resurrected Christ. He received his commands. And John's whole life changed after the arrival of Jesus. And he began to devote himself to the Lord. He gave up his previous way of life, and he begins to preach the gospel everywhere he goes. Church history tells us that John eventually finds his way to Ephesus, and it's in Ephesus that John is arrested and he's shipped off to Rome. In Rome, the emperor condemns John to be put to death by being thrown in this cauldron of boiling oil, which there are lots of bad ways to die, but I feel like that would probably be towards the top of the list, right? And so they throw John into the oil, but it tells us that John is not killed, that he's miraculously delivered from that experience. And in response to it, the emperor banishes John to the island of Patmos. It's an island where Rome sent their prisoners to work in mines, and really it's just kind of this meaningless slave-like existence where they most likely were going to die in exile while serving the needs of the empire. And so this is where John is. He has experienced the goodness of God. He's found Jesus to be the solution to his sin problem. He knows that God has put this longing for the first Eden in his heart and that Jesus is the way it's going to be realized. And yet he finds himself exiled on the backside of the empire, seemingly forgotten and alone. And it's while he's on the island that he begins to have this vision of what the end will be like. And John's vision of the end is really a vision of the beginning. It's a vision that when Christ comes, it marks a new age, a new beginning for all who believe in him. And so John writes this letter of Revelation that is both a letter to 7 churches encouraging them, and it's also an account of the vision that he receives from God. And what we're going to look at this morning is Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 through 8, where it really kind of hones in on exactly what this second Eden is going to look like. So if you look with me, Revelation chapter 21, verse 1, John says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain. For the old order of things has passed away.' He who was seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' Then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.' He said to me, 'It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. But the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death.'" Now, Revelation is one of those books that if you get into it and start to do a deep dive, it can get fairly confusing fairly quickly, right? And you start getting lost in visions of dragons and other things and beasts and antichrists. But John's he's winding his way down here in Revelation chapter 21. And in doing so, I think he's making the whole point of Revelation abundantly clear to us. The point of Revelation is Jesus will return. And he will return not to snatch us up out of here and take us off to some ethereal heaven, but he will return to restore a new heavens and a new earth, where we will live with him with resurrected bodies in the perfection of his recreation. John is painting a physical reality for us. And so what that means is that we must read this not as just this will happen someday out there, but this is going to happen someday right here. That all of this is going to be remade and recreated. And what John tells us is it's a new heaven and a new earth. The old has gone, the new has come, that everything that taints our hearts, everything that taints our world is completely removed and replaced by the perfection of God. He says God's dwelling place will be among his people and he will dwell with them. We will be his people and he will be our God. The distance between us and God is removed. Those questions, those longings you have of what does God look like? What does he require? What does he want me to do in the new heavens and the new earth? All of those are removed because you walk with him as they walked with him in the first Eden. This new creation marks the end of every hurt. It says he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. For the old order of things has passed away. This new creation is beautiful because it is completely untainted by sin. It's the return of perfect harmony with God, with each other, and with all of creation. He says, I'm making it all new. Everything that's wrong has been made right. Every hurt has been healed. Everything is made new in the image of God and for the glory of God. And we read that, and it could very well seem like, well, that's a nice hope for the future. But right in the middle, so John gives us this description. He says, look, this is what I saw, new heavens, new earth, God's dwelling with his people. And he said, then I heard a voice from the throne. And it said, hey, write it down. It's trustworthy and true. And Jesus himself speaks to John to draw his attention to, hey, you need to tell everyone who hears this message that this is trustworthy and true. It's going to happen. But listen to the phrasing he uses. He says, listen, write it down. It's trustworthy, it's true. And then he says, it is done. Right? John is somewhere in this land in between when he gets this vision. He's still in exile on the island of Patmos, and he's having this vision of the day that God returns and rules and reigns over all things. And what Jesus tells him is, look, the things that you are seeing are done. They're finished, right? It takes us back to Jesus' statement on the cross when he's being crucified and he cries out, it is finished. Right? And on the cross, what that statement means is the penalty for all sin has been paid for once and for all. I perfectly satisfied all these laws, all these rules, all these requirements. It's finished. And now when he gives John this vision, he tells him, it is done. All these things that I'm promising you, they are done. But how can that be? Right? How can he promise that this is done when it hasn't even happened yet? And he does it by reminding us, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. I am the beginning and the end. You know, that Alpha Omega, it's the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet. If John spoke English, he would have said, I'm the A to the Z. I'm the beginning and the end. I'm before all things. He's pointing us back to what Paul tells us in Colossians, that Jesus is before all things, and in him all things are created by him and for him. And so what Jesus is telling us here is, look, as John gets this vision, it's finished. And the reason it's finished is because he stood before the first Eden and he stands before the last Eden. And once he's decreed it in this moment, it's as good as done. And so the encouragement that brings for us today is that this is not a question of if. It's only a question of when. He is coming. He is going to return. Right? And this is where our understanding of God really can kind of lead us and guide us in difficult seasons of life. Because you see these different things, and there are many people who believe this idea that God created all things. Right? There are many people who believe in the arrival of Jesus, many who believe in the problem of sin. I think there are even many Christians who believe in the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and yet when it comes to the return, it's kind of like, I'm not so sure about that. I'll just wait and see. Right? And that's fine. You can wait and see. He's going to be right. Like, it's going to turn out how he said it would. You can wait if you want, but if we're going to really kind of plant our stake in the ground and say, yeah, I believe he made all things. I believe we ruined it. I believe Jesus is redeeming it. And I believe one day he's going to completely restore it. Then that changes the way we live in this land in between. Right? It changes it completely. It means that I can begin to live in ways right now that are congruent with this eternal kingdom that God is bringing. And so if he has promised that one day he will wipe every tear from our eyes, then in these moments, I can begin to trust that he will comfort me in my sorrow. If I really believe that one day he's going to come and completely wipe away all sin, then I will begin to live and work in ways here right now to reverse the effects of sin and point people to Jesus as a solution for their problem. See, it becomes a question of, do we believe it in theory or do we believe it in practice? And then John, just in case we're not uncomfortable enough yet, John concludes his vision with this. The cowardly, the unbelieving, The vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. Now, this is why the return of Christ was terrifying for me as a kid. Right? And this is the part of the return of Christ that many of us, especially I think over the last 10 or 15 years, many Christians who believe in the Scriptures, who believe in the arrival of Christ, it's statements like this that are increasingly causing Christians to say, yeah, I'm okay with everything but that. But the reason Jesus refers to hell, the reason John refers to it here, is because they're reminding us to get to the second Eden requires the complete elimination of everything that took us out of the first Eden. Right? It's the complete annihilation of everything that stands in opposition to God. And so with the arrival of Jesus, he tells us, look, the adulterers, the murderers, the thieves, the idolaters, all of them are welcomed into my kingdom, and his arms are open wide to them. But what the Scriptures also teach us is God's not going to force anyone into this kingdom. Right? We all have our own choices to make, but what Revelation both warns and reminds us of is that the choices we're making here about what we're going to do with Jesus will determine our experience here. And it's not terribly popular, and it honestly would be much easier if we just said, he'll take care of it and everybody's in. But all we have to go on are what the Scriptures tell us. And they tell us that those who willfully and joyfully and continually reject the goodness and the grace of God here will be given to the consequences of those choices there. And John is reminding us of what the Scriptures teach us, that every time we engage in the temptations of our heart, every time we choose the opposite of what God has revealed to us, we're bringing little pieces of hell into God's creation. Right, this is why Justin and Leah have to run this summer camp over in North Tulsa. Because hell's come to our city. This is why we have to do Royal Family Kids Camp, because hell has come to our city. This is why we suffer and hurt, because in so many ways sin has thoroughly corrupted creation and us. And so every time we engage it, hell is revealed. And what Revelation 21 is telling us is, hey, if you make that your path and you make that your God, that's going to be your destination. And it's not that God wills it. It's not that God takes any pleasure in it, but he will allow you the result of your choices. But he's not going to let you get there without throwing up thousands upon thousands of invitations for you to turn to Christ. But this is where John ends, this picture of a new heavens and a new earth, this glorious, beautiful land. And yet John, like you and me, he lived in this land in between, right? And so one of the things that I want to help us understand this morning is I think a lot of times it's easy for us as Christians to hear the promises of the second coming. And no more tears, no more sorrow, death is gone, the old order is completely done away with. And we want that experience so bad right now that we get mad at God when he doesn't give it to us. We think, Jesus, I surrendered to you. I've said yes to you. I've invited you into my life. And yet I still hurt. Yet I still suffer. I still get sick. I'm still depressed. I still have these struggles and these doubts. I still see people who are being persecuted for their faith. I still have all these problems. And one of the most common conversations I have with disappointed Christians is because they're holding God accountable for things he never promised to them. Right? He has promised us this experience, but he's promised it to us at the return of Christ. And until that day, we live by the power of Christ through the strength of the Holy Spirit with our eyes looking towards the future, asking God to help us to live in ways in this moment that are congruent with the kingdom he's going to establish. But we do not hold him responsible for establishing this kingdom while the world is still broken. And so we join with him and we long to reveal his kingdom in the midst of a broken world. And yes, yet we also do it with an awareness that until this day comes, there will be pain, there will be hurting, there will be suffering. But I believe Jesus is very intentional in reminding us of his return. That he has come and he's been resurrected and he will come again. He does that to remind us that there's nothing here he can't handle. One of my favorite ways to watch sports at times is to DVR it and to watch it the next day, right? Especially if it's my team, because I tend to get a little too emotionally invested, and my wife won't watch TV with me sometimes. So if I DVR it, I can get up the next morning and I can look on my phone and I can see who won. And if my team won, then I can look at it, right? Now, big games, I'm going to watch them live and yell things. But, like Thunder, they play like 1 million games in here. So I'll get up and I'll see like, oh, okay, look, Westbrook hit a game winner. I need to watch that. So I'll turn it on in the morning, watch maybe the fourth quarter, and, they do some dumb stuff in the fourth quarter. But I know, I'm not worried because they win, right? Like I already watched the highlight. I know what happens. Like, I know that guy's being a punk right now, but he's going to get dunked on so hard in about 5 minutes that the universe will be made right again, right? This is kind of, in a much more serious way, what Jesus is doing for us when he tells us that he'll return. He is teaching us to look towards the future with hope, with peace, and with perseverance. He's reminding us, hey, if right here, listen to what I'm saying, if right here I'm going to remake heaven and earth, if right here the old order of things is going to be done away with, if right here I'm going to completely wipe out all of the garbage that's ever happened, if right here I'm going to take you all the way back to the first Eden, except it's going to be even better than that because there'll be no more fear, no more hurt, no more pain. If I'm going to do that, if the new heavens and the new earth are going to descend and you're going to rule and reign with a resurrected body, if I can do that, you really think I'm worried that you don't have a job? You really think I'm worried that you're sick? You really think I'm worried that your kid was mean to you this morning? You really think I don't know where they are? You really think I can't handle it? But that's us, right? We're in this land in between, and it seems so far away that we think he's just not even involved. But what Revelation is teaching us is he's here, he's there, and because he's there and can do all this, he can do this. If you can trust Jesus on this day, you can trust him on all of these. There is nothing you're dealing with that's a bigger deal than remaking heaven and earth, right? Like, I know you're pretty convinced you've got a lot of problems right now, and you probably do, but he's bigger, right? Write these words down. It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I stand before your problems and after your problems. I'm chasing after that child. I'm drawing you back to myself. I got you this job. I'll get you the next job. I will lead you. I will guide you. Wherever you go, whatever you do, he is coming again, and his kingdom is here right now. And while we long for it there, we strive to live in it here by his grace and by his power. If you'll stand with me, they're going to lead us in this song they taught us earlier. And it has this line in it that I want you to sing and declare over your situations this morning. It says, who can stop the Lord Almighty? Right? Who can stop him? And the answer is no one and nothing. So whatever you're facing, whatever your struggle, whatever brought you in today, God's message to you is clear, that he has a plan and he's working that plan. He's got a plan from your birth till long after your death. And if you will rule and reign with him here, he's going to take care of you right here and right now. So sing this as a declaration of your faith. Sing it as the cry of your heart. Who can stop the Lord Almighty? Who can